The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So Wisconsin voted yesterday, and everything was riddled in such chaos and so last minute with the Supreme Court deciding that indeed the Wisconsin election was going to go on. I was planning on doing a live stream last night with Wisconsin results, only to learn like 15 minutes before the polls closed that the bulk or really all of the results for the presidential primary won't be available for somewhere between 3 and 5 more days. And I ended up, I just lost connection with Pat, but I'll keep talking here while we wait to get him back. In any case, I was planning on doing a stream, and then it turns out we're not going to be getting those results. Let's see if we can get Pat back here. That's really weird what happened there. Let's see if Pat will call us back. Very interesting. We're just going to keep going because why not? And Pat got knocked offline, it seems. Very, very strange what's going on here. In any case, we don't know ultimately what the results, we don't yet know what the results of Wisconsin are ultimately going to be, although it doesn't really matter because Bernie Sanders has indeed dropped out. Okay, we've got Pat back. Pat, I just kept talking while you were gone. We lost connection. But in any case, the point was, we're not going to know the results. Bernie has now dropped out, so it's like, does it even really matter? But hundreds of thousands of people's lives were put at risk by having to mass gather and vote in Wisconsin.
Yeah, I didn't hear everything that you said there, so forgive me if I repeat some stuff. But you already had a live stream yesterday covering Trump's press conference, and you also recorded an entire show. So right. I think it was okay that you were able to skip that other live stream yesterday. That's fine. But yeah, the fact that they had voting in Wisconsin yesterday, absolutely crazy. We talked about that yesterday, and just seeing some of the images coming out of there where they have people separated by 6 feet. Everyone's supposed to bring their own black or blue pens with them so you don't have to reuse the same pens. Everyone was wearing masks. I mean, I guess they went about it in the best possible way that they could, but the bottom line is they shouldn't have had this election at all.
Well, and also from some of the video, not everybody was wearing masks, but a lot of people certainly were. And the other element of confusion was there were people who had gone through the process of requesting absentee ballots. They never got them. So then yesterday they were put in a position to decide, do I count on getting it before there's some number of days after during which you're allowed to submit it? They did an extension. Or do you just assume maybe I'm not getting it, so I'll show up to vote, even though I did all the right things to not have to go and show up? I mean, absolute and total chaos.
And of course, it's easy to say if Wisconsin has a surge in cases and deaths over the next few days, then the people who allowed this election to go through will have blood on their hands, although you never really can tie it back conclusively. You don't know for sure if it was because of the election, although I think there would be strong evidence to suggest that. Another interesting tidbit, and I heard this, I wasn't able to independently verify it, but I did hear that the Supreme Court in Wisconsin that allowed this election to go on, they didn't convene in person to make that decision. They did so remotely. So the fact that they weren't even willing to get together with that few group of justices to make sure that the election goes through, but they were willing to have thousands and maybe millions of residents go out there.
Hundreds of thousands, I think.
Hundreds of thousands, maybe, of residents go out there to vote in a time that's just so unsafe. I mean, how much does that tell you? They'll do anything to create voter suppression in that state, and it's just despicable.
I'm going back to this idea that I mentioned. At this point, it's been 6 weeks ago, which is the virus is a crisis in and of itself, but the virus is also exposing a lot of the very weak and deranged underbelly of everything in the country. So this includes things like how fragile the economy is. You know, Trump claiming we had the best economy ever in history up until a month ago. Whether you believe that or not, a lot of the numbers were very good. The fact that it instantly crumbles shows us the systemic fragility of the system. In the same way, we are seeing the rampant corruption and sort of prioritizing politics over everything else of so many different bodies. To some extent, even, some of the Dr. Birx, I think, is half in the tank for Donald Trump, and she can only partially be trusted. Supreme Courts, it's crazy.
And we're realizing now we need backup plans, right? It doesn't seem like we have the best backup plans for this sort of thing. And looking forward to the November 2020 election, we're going to have 50 different elections across the country. It's not like the elections are done at a national level. Every state will have to decide what they're going to do. And so if we have a second wave of this thing, which is certainly possible coming in the fall, and people aren't willing and able to go out and vote at polling places like we're used to, we're going to have a system in place, whether that's mail-in voting, which of course Trump is against, maybe voting online, which I know that has its own host of security issues. But it seems like going out and voting in person is just not going to be the best option if we're dealing with a scenario like we are now in November.
No doubt about it. And every indication so far that we will be. The question is, will we recognize it right away and start the mitigation? That's really the question about what we're calling wave 2. News out of Los Angeles. Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti has now announced last night that everyone should wear a face covering when they visit essential businesses, which are the only ones that are supposed to be open. And the idea is, again, if you are under the mindset that the mask is to protect others, the idea is wear a face covering to protect the workers that are working at the essential businesses. You have to wear a mask, bandana, or something else when you go to a grocery store, pharmacy, hardware store, laundry, restaurant, which should be just for takeout, hotel, taxi, Uber, Lyft vehicle, and other essential businesses. My brother lives in LA, and he had to go to the dentist yesterday. Now, as many of you know, dentists are of the most at risk. So there's this curve, right, of how closely do you work with people there? Anyway, and it sort of like ranks on a curve, different professions. Dentists are the most at risk because you're literally getting right up in someone's mouth. And my brother is in the middle of a dental treatment where you have to go in at certain predetermined intervals, or like the treatment doesn't work and you start to have problems. His dentist was managing it in the following way. First of all, my brother brought tissues with which to press the buttons on the elevator. All building doors are being propped open, so no one has to touch the doors. Of course, it's Los Angeles, so it's not cold, so that's no problem. When he gets off on the dentist's floor, instead of going in through the front door, they have a side door, as many dentists do, which is propped open. You go directly in, and there's a sign that points you into an actual exam room. Once he got in, they brought him hand sanitizer. They also had, they had him wash his hands with the sink that's in the room, and they had him gargle with hydrogen peroxide.
Wow.
And they had him sign something that says, I've not traveled domestically for 14 days. I've not traveled internationally for 14 days. I'm not experiencing any of the following symptoms. I understand that we are in this emergency situation, blah, 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 blah. Once they examined him, they needed like a half hour during which to like tweak an apparatus that he needs. And they said, go wait in your car for the next half hour. We'll text you when it's ready, and then you come back up. So they're taking it very seriously, and the risk of contagion with that procedure is low, but this is how serious it's gotten.
It sounds like it's still possible even with all those precautions, though. That's why it's so scary.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think making the face mask mandatory for now, that makes a lot of sense. Especially, I think they should have gloves be mandatory too, because we do know now that the virus can be airborne, but it seems like most of the transmissions happen from people touching things and then touching their face. So I think the gloves especially should be mandatory when people are going to these essential businesses. And the thing that worries me so much is like when you're checking out at the grocery store, if you're doing like a self-checkout, or even if you go to a cashier and you put your credit card in, and then you maybe have to put in your PIN number for a debit card, you have to like touch the thing a bunch of times. Like that's what freaks me out. That's why I started wearing gloves. And maybe I'll start doing the mask thing too. I have one here that I can start wearing.
Oh, look at that. Now, what kind of a mask is that? That looks like a good one.
Well, it's a 3M mask, but it's not the N95. So
Got it.
It's okay. In fact, I can do it for the rest of the bonus show if you want.
Can you talk through it?
Can people hear me okay?
Yeah, I think it's fine, actually. I am more comfortable with you wearing it. I would prefer you wear it. Hey, so listen, I have an admission to make, and then I want to get on to the Boris Johnson update. I'm not becoming a prepper, but over the last 10 to 12 days, I have been reading a lot of articles about what you should have in any car kit that you just leave in your trunk, what you should have in a go bag at home, and what you should have in your home for preparedness. And up until now, I really don't have that much. I have a first aid kit. I have, a few other items, but really not. I have like in my car, I've got a paper map atlas and one of those sort of like tinfoil type blankets. I forget exactly what it's called, but it looks like tinfoil, and a few other things. I'm building out a list of items, and once things have settled, I don't want to take any masks away from people now or anything, but I am going to build a more substantial supply. I'm not becoming a prepper. I'm not going to have a year worth of food or anything like that. But for me, this has really awakened not a panic in me, but just a desire to have more stuff, right? So everything from waterproof matches to a powerful lighter, a lot of backup batteries. I'm probably going to get, once they are not in short supply, some N95 masks, some surgical gloves. I'm going to have a go bag. I probably will get a bunch of these bricks that you fill with water, and you can keep water. You know, you have to rotate it every once in a while, but otherwise you just keep water in case the water is cut off for 72 hours. I am taking it more seriously now.
Yeah, I remember a couple of years ago we did a segment when you were starting to become a prepper just a little bit. You were dabbling in it, and you went over the list of items that you bought.
Right.
With this next wave of you preparing for the next crisis, was there anything that you saw recommended for you to purchase that you were surprised by, that you didn't think would help in an emergency situation, but once you saw it on the list, you realized, yeah, that would be useful?
Let me look. I have a list that I've been building on my in a to-do. Let me give you some of the items that maybe would be surprising to you.
Soylent should probably be on there so you can eat for a few days.
Well, how long does Soylent last?
Oh, a long time. I'm sure it has a long shelf life.
Maybe I'll get, I mean, I certainly am going to get some food supplies. Okay, so here's a random item. Zip ties. I wouldn't ever to myself think that you want to have zip ties, but I've been reading that they take up so little space and are so light and can be used for so many things. You can secure a gauze if someone has a cut with a zip tie. You can use it if you have an electrical or a plumbing issue, like zip ties. I don't know. I never would have thought of zip ties, but I guess zip ties make sense.
You can use them as handcuffs in case you have to restrain someone. That's
true.
another use for them too.
That's a whole other area, which is self-defense items. And most of the prepper websites, I don't do like the right-wing prepper websites. I do normal prepper. Oh, Pat having a problem with his mouse. I do like normal prepper websites, and they try to be apolitical. So they say like, you know, this is a very personal thing. We're not saying you should have guns. We're not saying you shouldn't. Like because I'm not doing right-wing prepping, you know?
Interesting. I would imagine most of the prepping is done by right-wingers, so you'd think they'd have no problem including guns and all the other stuff that you'd expect from them.
No, I'm using the less political prepper websites. Okay, briefly, we've heard from British Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab that he is confident Prime Minister Boris Johnson will recover from the coronavirus. Boris Johnson got coronavirus about a week ago, or was tested positive about a week ago. He became sick enough that a couple of days ago he had to go to the hospital. He then became sick enough that he had to be moved to the ICU. He now remains in what they call critical care. I don't think that's an ICU. I believe that is a step below the ICU, based on how the UK delineates the levels. But he is not receiving, I guess he is no longer receiving as much mechanical assistance to the extent that he was. So it seems like he's going to be okay.
That's great news. My hope with this finding, this news surfacing, I was just hoping that maybe they were doing this as a precaution. So,
Right.
You have this guy who's the leader of a country, right? He's the prime minister of the UK. I hope they were just trying to do it so they could take every step possible to make sure that he survives through this. And yeah, I mean, the scary thing is like he started getting sick, like you said, about a week ago, maybe a little over a week ago. I've never had an illness where my symptoms persisted past like 3 or 4 days. Like that's always been the worst of it for me. And so the fact that it seems to be getting worse for him, even though he's had it for so long, that's what's so scary about this virus.
Very common. I mean, a lot of people report you just have a somewhat of a fever and a cough for many days, and then it gets worse. And there are even reports of it taking 60 days for full recovery for some people. Most of those cases out of China based on the timeline, but it's serious. It's very, very serious.
Yeah, and Boris Johnson, he's in his mid-50s. Apparently, he runs every now and then, so he's not in the
Every now and
worst
then.
shape. Yeah, I don't think he's in the absolute worst shape, and he's maybe not at the most at-risk category, like he's not in his 70s or 80s or whatever. But you never know with this thing. I mean, like it's kind of rolling the dice. There are plenty of young and healthy people who are getting really, really sick, and some even dying from this virus. And we don't know exactly what causes that, why it hits some people harder than it does others. But yeah, we're all rooting for Boris Johnson. This isn't about politics right now. We don't want anyone to die. We don't want anyone to get the illness. We're not wishing that upon anyone, of course.
Right.
And hopefully he makes it through pretty soon.
I saw some data out of New York State, which of course has a huge sample size because they have so many cases. And of all the deaths, apparently 1.2% of the deaths so far have been young people without comorbidities. And I don't know whether we should feel relieved or worried by that number, but that's the number
Yeah.
we have so far out of New York State.
That actually does sound pretty low. Do you know what they counted as young people, though? Is it like below 40, below 50?
I think for the purposes of this, it's below 40.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's at least a bit of a promising sign. But again, it's just weird how like there are some people you hear about who are maybe like 20 years old and they're
Yeah.
athletes, and then they get hit with this virus. Maybe it's coupled with pneumonia, and then they're fighting for their life in a very short time. And that's what has to make you think. Even if you are a young person watching this, you're at risk too. I mean, you should do it not only for the sake of old people, but for your own sake as well. And I think
No
people
doubt.
understanding that will make them act in the way that we want them to.
All right, that does it for today. Join me later, if it's later, depending on when you listen to this, for today's White House coronavirus press briefing live on YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, and Facebook Live. Otherwise, we will see you tomorrow.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.